deeply disturbing and wrong. That's how the British Prime Minister Theresa May has described images from the United States of migrant children being held in cages. President Trump's hardline policy has seen families separated. Now Republicans in Congress are trying to agree on new laws to end the practice. But reconciling different views is proving tricky, as a new report shows the U.S. has overtaken Germany as the top migrant destination. David Willis reports.
Amid growing concern from members of his own party, the president came to Capitol Hill to talk about the crisis on the southern border.
The system has been broken for many years, the immigration system. It's been a really bad system, probably the worst anywhere in the world. We're going to try and see if we can fix it. Thank you very much.
Having met with Republicans, he was heckled by Democrats.
Quit separating the kids. They're separating the children. Mr. President, don't you have kids?
Still, though, no word of an imminent solution.
We had 8 meetings. These are laws that have been broken for many years, decades, and we had a great meeting. Thank you very much.
Pressure to reform America's immigration system is being driven by images such as these. Children kept in cages after being separated from their parents. Under a new zero-tolerance policy, anyone caught crossing the border illegally is now being arrested. 2,000 sons and daughters have been separated from their parents in little over a month. But far from bowing to public pressure, the president is doubling down. In one tweet on the subject, he warned of illegal immigrants infesting the country, and he continues to blame the Democrats, even though Republicans control both chambers of Congress.
The president alone can fix it with this flick of a pen by signing a presidential order to end the agonizing screams of small children who have been separated from their parents. Mr. President, I'll lend you my pen. Any pen. You can fix it yourself.
Mr. Trump insists the solution lies with Congress.
Let the children go!
But as protests sprout up around the country and in the face of growing international condemnation, one conservative talk show host has likened the situation to a crisis which threatened to derail a previous Republican administration, warning that this could be Trump's Katrina. David Willis, BBC News, Los Angeles.
Now to other stories making headlines here on Impact. The coalition fighting for the Yemeni government says it's now in full control of Hodeidah Airport. It's part of a week-long offensive to clear the Red Sea port city of Houthi rebels, which is the key point of entry for vital aid supplies for the country. The Foreign Minister of South Korea, Kang Kyung-hwa, has said sanctions against the North will remain in place until complete denuclearization has been achieved. She urged concrete action from Pyongyang in return for security guarantees. The United States has also stressed that there will be no early sanctions relief for Pyongyang. And optimism about the future of Christianity in China has been expressed by Pope Francis. In a rare interview, he rejected criticism that the Holy See may be selling out Roman Catholics to Beijing's communist government. The Vatican and China are in advanced talks over the appointment of bishops in China, one of the biggest obstacles to resuming diplomatic ties that were cut almost 70 years ago. Now let's go to Indonesia, where the authorities say they now believe more than 190 people are still missing after the sinking of a ferry in Sumatra. Just 18 survivors have been found, all within hours of the ferry sinking into Lake Toba, one of the deepest lakes in the world. The authorities fear many people could have been trapped inside the submerged ferry. Rebecca Henschke has more from Jakarta.
The wooden boat that sank in this picturesque volcanic lake when it hit bad weather is believed to have been 3 times over capacity. Authorities say it was operating illegally and didn't hand out tickets to passengers, so there is no details about who was on board or how many people. Authorities are having to go off families coming forward and reporting their missing loved ones. Search teams are still combing the lake looking for any survivors. They'll say they'll do that for at least the next 7 days. And an information centre has been set up on the side of the lake for desperate families seeking news. This is a very popular time to be travelling in Indonesia as millions head home to celebrate the Islamic festival of Eid. This would be Indonesia's worst maritime accident for years, but they are not uncommon. In the last week, there has been 4 boat accidents. And officials have admitted to the BBC that they are struggling to enforce even basic safety standards across this vast archipelago of more than 13,000 islands. Survivors have talked about not enough life jackets on board and how they had to scramble to grab one as the boat went underwater. Rebecca Henschke, BBC News, Jakarta.
Well, let's return to the issue of migration, which is also a major and divisive challenge here in Europe. Leaders of several nations will hold a meeting in Brussels at the weekend to discuss policy. In Germany, Chancellor Angela Merkel is coming under increasing pressure from coalition allies to take a tougher stance. In a speech marking Refugee Day, she emphasized the migrant issue is a European challenge. Have a listen.
Deutschland steht sowohl zu seiner humanitären Verantwortung.
We stand by our humanitarian responsibility to protect people fleeing from war and terror, and we also stand by our responsibility for European unity. Both go together, because no matter which way you look at it, migration is a European challenge, perhaps right now our biggest challenge, and it is about keeping Europe together.
Ja.
Angela Merkel there. Well, few parts of Europe take a stronger stance on migration than Hungary. Their lawmakers have been debating plans that the government claims will protect the country from some immigration. But critics say they demonize asylum seekers. Well, joining me now from Budapest is our correspondent Nick Thorpe. Nick, that controversial vote is actually taking place as we speak.
That's right. Parliament has just assembled for its afternoon session, so we're expecting in the next 45 to 50 minutes or so Parliament to push through that legislation. Also an amendment to the Constitution which would ban what's called the settling of alien populations in Hungary.
Nick, just tell us why the government feels it needs these laws in place.
Basically, the Orban government has, since the start, really, of the refugee migrant crisis in 2015, argued that these are not genuine refugees, despite the experience and indeed the judgments passed in other European countries. It says these are largely economic migrants, and even those who are genuine refugees from war zones like Syria or Afghanistan, that these are people that should have stopped earlier on, that under the 1951 Geneva Convention, if they've passed through safe countries, which, for example, like Greece in Hungary's view or Serbia, they should have stayed there. So they have no argument to be in Hungary in the first place, and that's why, having targeted those migrants as they see them, refugees as many others see them in the past, now they're targeting those who help them in Hungary, namely NGOs, human rights groups that work with asylum seekers. Ironically, of course, these are people that have already been allowed legally into Hungary by the Hungarian authorities themselves.
And what's been the response from these NGOs? Because essentially, this law criminalizes assisting migrants.
It does indeed, and first of all they say effectively it's illegal nonsense because they shouldn't be targeted in the first place, that they're carrying out their moral and legal right under international law to help these people. But the Hungarian government in response argues that it won the recent election in April on the grounds that Hungarians do not want Hungary to become what they call an immigration country, in other words a country with a significant proportion of the population with an immigrant background, and therefore the government feels justified in passing legislation like this and this new rather draconian amendment to the Constitution today.
Nick, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks so much for that update. Now, new data offering a snapshot into the lives of children and women in North Korea shows slight improvements but persistent challenges. The report by UNICEF released today says humanitarian aid is making a difference to the health of North Koreans across the country, but there's still much to do. Well, earlier I was joined by Mark Herwood, Associate Director of Data and Analytics at the United Nations Children's Charity. I asked him about the findings of the report.
There is progress. The work that we've all been doing together in humanitarian assistance over the last 10 years or more does seem to be paying off quite clearly, yet there's a lot remaining to be done. We can see a big difference
Go
big
ahead.
difference geographically within North Korea. Within DPRK, we can see, for example, that the undernutrition rates are very much better in Pyongyang, in the capital, than they are in the more remote rural provinces. So that tells us that the work we need to do is keeping on reaching out and finding the most marginalized and making sure that all the assistance reaches them.
Just tell us specifically what is helping to improve the situation, because of course the report also highlights the fact that, you know, so many children are affected, their growth has been stunted. For example, we see huge malnutrition in the country. So what is it that's actually helping to improve their lives?
Yes, so there's a combination of work that is undertaken. There's work which addresses the very immediate needs of the most desperate and worst off, where UNICEF works with the World Food Programme to reach with emergency feeding. But there is also the more fundamental work on reaching out to households, showing how to use the resources they do have for better nutrition for their children, making sure that the breastfeeding is kept up long enough because that's such a wonderful source of nutrition. And there's work actually we can still see remains to be done on making sure that the water that children in particular are drinking is pure and is not likely to cause them illness, because once you get ill, then that makes you more likely to be malnourished.
How exactly are you able to assess the situation on the ground, given everything is so tightly controlled and it's actually quite difficult for UNICEF to access the country?
Well, actually, UNICEF has access to the vast majority of counties in the country. So those are the places where we are programming. And so our staff go out. There are a few counties where it's only the national employees of UNICEF who are able to go in, but the vast majority of countries, all of our staff have access. So we're able to go out and make sure that the life-saving work that we're doing is reaching the people who need to be reached.
That was Mark Herwood from UNICEF there. Stay with us here on Impact, still to come.
I'll be live here in Moscow speaking to a former Miss Russia, who is now an official FIFA ambassador.
Hello again, I'm Yalda Hakim, and Mariam's here to tell us what's coming up on Talking Business. How are you?
Yes, plenty to talk about. First of all, the story about the southern border in the States and the children being separated from their families. That, of course, is a story that's touched so many people. It has also touched the business world, in particular the tech world. 100 Microsoft employees have written to the company so that they're not happy about the fact that Microsoft is working with the Southern Border Agency. Now, Microsoft's boss, Satya Nadella, has responded. He says the policy is cruel and abusive, but he's defended Microsoft's work with border control, saying it isn't linked to separating children. So we'll have more on that story and what it means for big tech firms with a conscience. Also talking about Disney, it's raised its offer in the latest in the bidding war for some of 21st Century Fox's assets. If you remember, Disney and Comcast are battling to take over some of the assets of 21st Century Fox. So we'll have the latest from the New York Stock Exchange on that story. And finally, do you like your advertisements to be long or short?
Mostly short.
How's your attention span?
Pretty short.
We've been doing this. We've been looking at this research, which shows that 6-second advertisements, which you normally get on the internet, are the way forward for many ad agencies. We'll be talking to someone from a big ad agency about the way that advertisements are getting shorter and shorter as people's attention spans go the same way.
Wow, fascinating. I'll tune into that one. Mariam, thanks so much. Now, it's day 7 of the World Cup, and there's lots of talk about it. Let's go straight to Lucy, who's been following all the excitement and drama. Lucy.
Hi, Yalda. Welcome to Moscow. I have a television screen in front of me with a game that's live right now. It is Portugal-Morocco. I'm going to drag my eyes away to bring you up to date, because not far from here at the Luzhniki Stadium, Cristiano Ronaldo is proving once again why so many people consider him to be the greatest player of his generation. He has scored Portugal's only goal against Morocco. That game 1-0 at the moment. But remember, that's after his hat-trick in Portugal's opening group match. in the second half of that game. Yes, still 1-0. Next up, we have Uruguay versus Saudi Arabia. That's happening in Rostov. And then later on, it's Iran against Spain. Spain, of course, remain one of the favourites in this tournament. But if you speak to a Russian anywhere today, anywhere out there, which I've been doing, they will tell you who their favourites are now. The hosts, full of confidence and optimism after an amazing 3-1 win over Egypt last night. The fans celebrated well into the night. Many people were late for work today, I'm sure, but we went along late in the night to join them.
Welcome to Moscow! All people, forward!
Atmosphere, because Russia win 3-1. It's easy game, and everyone's happy. It's great. It's beautiful.
2 games in a row, 8-1 overall. What the hell's going on? Good game, Russia. Very good game.
We are very proud of our national team because it was incredible.
3-1.
And Yelda, I have to remind you, of course, that Russia are the lowest ranked side in this tournament. When I first arrived here in Russia, no one was giving them a chance. They were saying they're going to do poorly. There was no optimism in the team. So the turnaround, I think, is part of the joy here in Russia at the moment. It seems that everyone is a football fan. Just looking down at this game, still 1-0 Portugal-Morocco. We're keeping across all the action. I know I promised you a former Miss Russia. This is an indication of how busy Moscow is right now. The traffic here is terrible. She is stuck in traffic. She is on her way. Ollie is with us later, keeping across all of the rest of the day's action. He's going to be talking to her, so you will see her coming up here on BBC World News. But for now, that's it from me in Moscow.
Lucy, thanks so much. We look forward to that interview. Now, here in London, the British Prime Minister Theresa May is facing the possibility of defeat in Parliament in a vote on key Brexit legislation. The debate will begin shortly in the House of Commons, focusing on how much say members of Parliament should get on what happens if the UK can't strike a Brexit deal with the EU. Well, our political correspondent Rob Watson has been following developments and explained the consequences of this vote to me a little earlier.
Let me just say this, that whatever happens in this vote, that pressure isn't going to go away until between now and when Britain leaves the European Union, and that's simply just to get the big picture here that Theresa May no longer has a majority in Parliament. Her governing Conservative Party is deeply divided over what Britain's future relationship with the European Union should be. And thirdly, and I guess most importantly in some ways, leaving the European Union is just immensely complex. Now, as for this latest challenge, I mean, it looks as though the government will probably win. It'll be tight, it'll be close. There may even have to be another compromise like there was last week to stave off a defeat. But I guess at some point Theresa May is going to have to decide which wing of her Conservative Party she will eventually face down, the sort of pro-Europe wing or the anti-Europe wing.
Rob, just help our world audiences understand exactly what the vote today is about, because as far as they're concerned, you know, MPs have already voted.
No, right. I mean, you know, not just people watching, people in this country and all over the world. I mean, very specifically, this is about whether Parliament should really be able to say to the government, look, we don't like the deal you've negotiated with the European Union, or we don't like the idea of Britain leaving without any deal at all if the negotiations fail. So it's about this idea of making sure that Parliament has a say both over any negotiation about a future relationship Britain reaches with Brussels, or indeed just to make sure that Britain can't leave the EU without a deal, because certainly many pro-Remain MPs just think that would be an utter catastrophe.
That was our political correspondent Rob Watson there. Now some breaking news that's just come in. A report in Britain says more than 450 elderly people died in a hospital in southern England as a result of being given unnecessary opioid painkillers. The investigation into the deaths in the town of Gosport found that another 200 had probably died in the same way between 1989 and 2000. The head of the inquiry said there had been an institutional practice of shortening lives. And of course, we'll have more on that story coming up here on Impact and throughout the day on BBC World News. Now, is our civilization rising or falling? That's the question behind a new exhibition at the National Gallery in London. The American artist Ed Ruscha, one of the pioneers of pop art, is now in his 9th decade, and he's showing a series of works looking at the rise and fall of empire. David Silito went to meet him.
This is a story about how our industrial world is changing through the eyes of a man whose life's work has been the strange landscape of modern life.
Almost any change can upset people, whether it's a glorified something or other, or whether it's the total removal of something.
They're portraits of then and now. Ed Ruscha stands with Andy Warhol and Roy Lichtenstein as one of the giants of pop art, an artistic passion for the everyday of modern life, the gas stations, the word pictures, oof. And the inspiration for this exhibition are these 19th century paintings by Thomas Cole about the rise and fall of empire. Ed Ruscha's rise and fall begins with our recent industrial past.
The old, very American workplace is now rather less American. The trade school is, of course, now no longer a trade school, and there's a lot more security. And whatever happened to the phone booth? As you can see, it's disappeared. The question is this all about just change, or progress, or decline?
You know, it's the pain of progress and the pain of change and all of that, but it can point to things positive too.
So where are we now? Is it the peak of empire consummation, or are we on the downward slope?
They're more or less devoid of political connotations, or, you know, they have a moral to them. They say progress, they say, and not necessarily positive progress. So it all seems like pandemonium, but there's some kind of peace involved in it.
Peace?
Peace of mind, peace of, you know, even if it's momentary, you can still smell the roses.
So, it's just a shifting landscape that's caught his eye and is worth turning into art. What it means is up to us. But while Ed Ruscha's life and inspiration may be Los Angeles, it's a shift that's going on all around us. The question is, are we looking at a sunrise or a sunset? David Silito, BBC News.
Now we'll be back in about 30 minutes' time with more of Impact. Mariam coming up with Talking Business in the next few minutes. But just a reminder of our top story, the controversial policy of the US government's decision to separate migrant children from their parents. President Trump is to meet fellow Republicans in the US Congress again to thrash out new laws on immigration. It comes as anger grows over the separation of children from their parents when families cross from the Mexican border. Of course, in the meantime, you can get in touch with me on Twitter. I'm at BBC Yalda Hakim. See you shortly.